Good morning again. Hope you're all having fun at the conference. And let's do this. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Lorenzo. I've been a desert dweller for the past 6 years, about 6 years. I moved from Italy and I went to Arcosanti State University in Tempe. I lived there, and then right after graduating from a planning program, I moved to Arcosanti, and that's where I lived for about 2 years. While my other former classmates were off to local government jobs and private planning firms, so I decided to go to Arcosanti, and I'm really lucky to have done so. So now I'm working for Las Vegas. It's been a few months, and that is me. With me there is Jeff Stein. He drove here from Arizona, Arcosanti, Arizona. He's an award-winning architect. He's the president of the Cosanti Foundation that manages Arcosanti and the land that Arcosanti is on, and the Cosanti project as well. He taught in several countries. He was dean of the Boston College of Architecture and Wentworth Institute for the Architecture School. He taught in Geneva, all over Europe, France, and now he's living in Arcosanti and being also the executive director for program development and fundraising. So thanks for being here, Jeff.
Thank you, and good morning, planners. Best of all, of course, which Lorenzo didn't mention, is that I was Lorenzo's co-worker for 3 years at Arcosanti. And those of you who are working with the city of Las Vegas now will find out soon enough what a great experience that was.
Yes. Okay, let's start. Let me start by telling a little bit how this came about, because Arcosanti and Las Vegas on the same screen, those two names put together, it's not that common. Obviously, I'm the link between these two, and the way I started thinking about it is why and what are some things that we can actually learn from each other. The small development, Arcosanti experimental town, and a large city, a large metro area, such as, well, the city of Las Vegas or the Las Vegas metro area as a whole. There are several parallels, especially if you think about the geography, climate, but also resources, and what are the things that we can learn from each other, and what are other things that obviously are completely different because they're different types of development in terms of scale and even goals. So hopefully this is going to help us. And what I want to encourage you to do is to jump in the conversation whenever you want. We would like this to be more of a discussion of different topics that we'll examine, and so feel free to do so. Now, the first thing that I want to read is this article from a great newspaper. A new study finds most of Earth's landmass will be Phoenix suburb by 2050. Syracuse, New York. Forecasting the continued rapid growth of the metropolitan area in the coming decades, a study published Thursday by researchers at Syracuse University has found that the majority of Earth's landmass will be Phoenix suburbs by 2050. Projecting present growth trends forward, we're able to determine that 35 years from now, the suburban area surrounding Phoenix, Arizona, will have expanded to occupy nearly 70% of all land on Earth, or roughly 137 million square miles across 6 continents. Said study co-author Grace Parsons explaining that the entire land area of North America would be subsumed by the suburban sprawl spreading out from Scottsdale by 2030, while new subdivisions on the outskirts of Glendale Litchfield Park would continue expanding westward, crossing the Pacific Ocean and encompassing most of Asia over the following decade. By the time the suburbs extend to the southern hemisphere in about 30 years, over 2/3 of Earth's land will be counted among the working class towns, affluent neighborhoods, commercial districts, and bedroom communities encircling Phoenix. The researchers warn, however, that a lack of adequate transportation infrastructure in the Phoenix metro area could create problems for workers driving in from the suburbs, estimating that traffic congestion during rush hour could add as much as 1,200 to 1,400 hours of their daily commutes.
So, of course, this is a humor magazine, and nothing like this will ever happen, but only because Phoenix is surrounded by federal land. It's grown to be just about as big as it can be at this moment, 900 square miles. 4.5 million people, nearly 3 million cars. The American Automobile Association statistics are that Phoenicians pay about $13 billion a year for cars, buying them, repairing them, and insuring them, and then another $12 to $15 billion a year for gasoline to fuel those cars, just so they can get to work in the morning or take their kids to soccer practice or go to the grocery store or the dentist. A huge transfer of wealth from nearly every citizen in the Phoenix area to a few car and fossil fuel companies. And there we are. So, planners, here's what we're planning for. Really, all of it's in this room and people outside this room across the corridor there too. The plan is for how to imagine 8 billion of us humans living on the planet. What's the pattern that is going to allow that to happen? How are we going to be connected? How can we possibly manage this? You know, according to most demographers, we're almost at 8 billion people on the planet now, unless you imagine that China underreports its population, and then we're right at 8 billion people. And so the answer is, we're all going to be living in cities. Right now, 2016, more than half of us on the planet live in cities. And within the lifetimes of some of us in this room, not all of us, by 2050, it's estimated that around 80% of us will be living in cities. That's going to do something to the demographics because of what happens to women in cities. They get higher education and they have fewer children. And so, rather than the population bomb that was predicted back in the 1970s to maybe 10 or 12 billion humans, it looks like as we move into cities, as we plan for that movement, the population is going to level out at about 8.3 billion. Not so bad, and then begin to shrink a little bit by the end of the 21st century. So that's our issue. How are we going to live on the planet? Here are two pictures, by the way. Arcosanti at the top, Las Vegas at the bottom, in case you needed that explanation. Arcosanti at this moment is a little bit like Las Vegas was in the early 1950s. A kind of desert outpost, attractive to a certain population, and of course it only started 40 years ago, so it's growing slowly.
How many of you have been to Arcosanti, by the way? Okay. Well, as Jeff said, that is what it looks like now, and we did enjoy, and Jeff still does, about 2 minutes commute or less to work. I'll be there. Right now the population is about 80 people. It's been more in the 70s, hopefully it will be more later. Obviously it is an outpost, as Jeff said, and works today as an educational institution. There are workshops that start every month or so. And that is what it looks like. And every structure Arcosanti has is intended to serve as a mixed-use structure. It's either educational and housing or housing and some kind of community space. So yes, I did enjoy a 2 minutes commute to work, and Jeff actually lives in the office because it's a three-story building, and he's at the top, and he can actually look down into the architecture studio.
It's a traditional way of life, living above the store, and so that's where I am currently. But Lorenzo mentioned something really important for architecture and for the architecture at Arcosanti, and that is when you design something, you just can't solve for one problem anymore. You have to solve at least for two, and if you can solve four things with the same structure, then that's really great. And so all of the buildings that you see across the top there are, as Lorenzo mentioned, multi-use structures. People live in them, they work in them, they turn out to be performing arts centers, maybe they are public space shelters. All sorts of things go on in all of these spaces. And so the place is enlivened all the time. It's not one city that you live in at night and another city that you commute to for your work during the day. So you need twice as much infrastructure and twice as much architecture. You get to stay in the same place and do all sorts of things 24 hours.
And obviously the 2 minutes commute is given by the scale of the project. However, if you, we'll go later into talking about how large the development of Arcosanti is supposed to be, but it's still, the plan is still to have a very compact urban form, and then outside the urban form, it would be a natural preserve. So density is the key word for Arcosanti, and that is, even though it wouldn't be a 2 minutes commute, it's still the important factor that how density affects mobility patterns, accessibility to services, jobs, and housing. So it is an extreme at Arcosanti now, but in the future, hopefully it will be still something very relevant. And for large cities, metro areas, the same thing can be applied. Now this is a list of the things that, again, we're going to look at. The land and the people, urban fabric and uses, environmental stewardship, and what future scenarios for Arcosanti and for us as well.
Well, a quote from the founder of Arcosanti, Paolo Soleri, and his photo there. Soleri was born in 1919 on, interestingly enough, summer solstice. June 21st was his birthday. He died just 3 years ago, April 9th, 2013. Here was his attitude too. Instead of recycling buildings, we need to rethink the relationship between persons and building and automobile. What is in order is reformulation, a radical reordering of our collective priorities. Someone just lately, I think in the New York Times, where it's about to be part of a magazine insert in the Wall Street Journal called The Future of Everything, points out that for many people who think about this stuff, Arcosanti was the birthplace of the sustainability movement, and Paolo Soleri kind of its grandfather. But in fact, Paolo Soleri never used the term sustainability, which is a word almost no one knows anything about anyway. And his issue wasn't to sustain whatever low level of civilization we're playing with right now, but to really transform ourselves, our consciousnesses, and our urban form so that it actually is coherent with what we now know about life on Earth. Show us another photo.
I like this one. So, Soleri first came to the US because he studied with Frank Lloyd Wright. He went to Taliesin West, and he spent about 2 years there. And it's interesting how the cohabitation with Frank Lloyd Wright happened to generate very different views on urban form. There you see Soleri, Taliesin West, Frank Lloyd Wright, and then under there, it's two little images that summarize what their view of urban form is and how uses and people and housing are meshed. That is an image from the SimCity arcology model, the one that you can build at the very it's the ultimate structure. And that is a little suburban home with their green space. Green space that Soleri criticized a lot in his writings and obviously in what he had built later. He thought of suburban home with their green lawn not as a way of being urban and being rural at the same time, but as a lie of being urban and rural at the same time. He underlined how it's a mash of two things, but at the same time it's none of these things. It's not urban and it's not rural at all. And that is why instead the way of building with a high, dense core and then natural preserve outside of that is a complete inversion of this scheme that instead Wright really proposed and what ultimately shaped our cities.
Yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright, Broadacre City, that's it, right outside. And Soleri's notion instead is this word. Soleri was great at mashing up English words, English his second language. Paolo Soleri and the arcology. Arcology, two words, architecture and ecology as two parts of a single understanding of how life goes on Earth. We recently had a television crew from Canadian TV at Arcosanti filming a special documentary about nature deficit disorder in young children in Canada and in North America generally. Apparently, this is a really interesting and troublesome big deal among elementary school children and people younger than that, in which all of them are getting all their information from flat screens inside darkened rooms with four walls, ceilings, floors, and that's it. The trouble with that is that 10,000 generations of humans have co-evolved with other patterns of nature, and without those, we're changing as a life form, and pretty rapidly as well, and not always for the better necessarily. Lorenzo pointed out that Paolo Soleri spent nearly 2 years at Taliesin after receiving a doctorate of architecture from the Torino Politecnico in Italy. And at Taliesin, even now in their NAB-accredited architecture school, the experience for students is camping until you build your own shelter. And so for a little more than a year and a half, Paolo Soleri camped out in the Sonoran Desert at Taliesin. At the end of that time, he and another architect from Taliesin West, Mark Mills, who later became a famous Californian architect, moved to the site of Camelback Mountain, where they set up another camp on the land of a developer for whom they were designing a series of houses that were never built. And 6 months after that, a woman came out from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who had just divorced her industrialist husband, and her brother owned some land in Cave Creek, Arizona, which is just north of Phoenix, and thought it would be therapeutic for her to design, well, to build her own house and have Frank Lloyd Wright design it. And she met with Wright, and Wright said, well, I'm awfully expensive, and I'm booked up for a few years, but there are these two wild men living on the side of Camelback Mountain, maybe you'd like them. And so she visited them, sure enough, she did like them, and they had her house designed 8 different ways. The main thing that she wanted to be able to do was, while she was in bed at night, look up and see the stars. And so they designed a dome, a glass dome with a solid piece that revolved with the sun, so you would never have to get direct sunlight in it. And that was the bedroom. It was actually kind of a model. You'll have to look this up on Google. We don't have an image of it today. But a kind of a model of the Guggenheim Museum, which was on the boards when Soleri was at Taliesin. Except instead of rising up 6 stories in New York, it is embedded in the earth. It's just a 1.5-story building with a curving staircase. The point of all this, though, is that for the first 3 years of his professional life, Paolo Soleri lived outdoors, not in any architecture at all, camping at Taliesin, on Camelback Mountain in Phoenix, and in Cave Creek while he was building this dome house. So of course here would be a guy who would say, whoa, wait a minute, we might not have to pave over everything. The Sonoran Desert has both a richness and a fragility, an ecosystem all to itself, which doesn't necessarily have to be destroyed just so humans can live around it and enjoy it. And so his notion at a time of really great world population growth was implosion of the urban form rather than explosion. His lived experience, not just intellectual but visceral, on the landscape, led him to imagine, to write about, to draw about, to build models about, and to develop an entire career around this notion of architecture and ecology as 2 parts of the human experience.
And 2 things that I want to mention is that it's interesting how both figures, Paolo Soleri and Wright, they're both architects. They started as architects, but they influenced so much of cities and theoretical movements for urbanism. And they shifted, one because of the immense traction that his way of thinking had, especially in the automobile boom in the 50s and 60s. And the other one shifted towards that because it did blend architecture and ecology, something that today we talk a lot about, how design can help cities, how we should design cities, design, and architecture is design, and ecology has the blending of both. That's what made Soleri a planner, even though is usually not referred to as a planner, but as an architect.
I was recently in Los Angeles on National Public Radio a couple weeks ago to talk about this sort of thing, and the interviewer said, how did Soleri and Wright get to Arizona? What are they doing in Arizona? Because this was somebody from Los Angeles who thinks Arizona's, retard-a-terre, I think is the term. Which, by the way, it actually is. But the issue for both of those guys, and for a lot more people now, is the desert. We're clearly the water planet. Earth is 7/10 of the surface of the planet is water, but we're also quickly becoming the desert planet. So those of us who live in desert environments, like just outside this wall, have a little advantage in a sense because we're experiencing this early on. But a third of the world's deserts have happened since 1900. And they continue to spread pretty rapidly, mostly, because of overgrazing, clear-cutting of forests, and human activity. But whether that's the issue or not, the real issue is deserts. The desertification of the earth is ongoing right now, and so if we can develop architecture, urban form, a kind of planning for this sort of climate, environment, dryness, aridity, we might be okay. About 2.8 billion humans live in deserts right now. And so anything that we can do about making a coherent way of living in them is going to be useful to practically a third of the world's population right away. This is the idea, arcology. So far, well, let's see. You know, urban planning, urban design as an academic discipline is pretty new. There are old cities, but all the urban designers are new. It's only been taught in colleges pretty much since World War II. And even then, almost no urban planners have actually planned entire cities, and nobody with any understanding much of evolutionary biology has ever planned a city. Mostly, cities get planned by real estate brokers for short-term profits. And so, as a result, very inexpensive, as inexpensive as possible, land made available for building buildings on very quickly for a fast turnover is how cities expand and in fact sprawl. So now we have this thin film of life over a great expanse of space, which isn't the way any other life form on the planet has evolved. All the other life forms, like us, are contained. We're in these containers. Humans are pretty much walking cities. 10,000 times more bacterial cells on us than human cells, and we're just walking around doing really interesting things. All these cells are found on their own, out in the environment, doing not much. But when they get together in this form, William Shakespeare, Beethoven, Lorenzo Mastino, Donald Trump, anything can happen. Anyway, the reason we are the dominant life form on the planet, for better or worse, is our design. This three-dimensional, compact, complex design, not only of our entire body, but especially of our brain. Each one of our brain cells synapses with another 15,000 brain cells packed tightly right around it. And so, if you're thirsty, you can get a drink of water because the time it takes that electrical impulse to go from, I think I need some water, to actually getting it is instantaneous. If, like Phoenix or Las Vegas, our brains were only a couple cells thick, they'd spread out for hundreds of feet on all sides of our head. The time it would take an electrical impulse to go from one side all the way to the other would be pretty long. Too long for us probably to be the dominant life form. So Soleri's notion for arcology is that cities really are the newest life form on the planet, 7,000 to 10,000 years old. They just haven't been around long enough to be able to be planned properly, to conform to how all the other life forms function on the planet. And so his notion of arcology, compact, complex, dense, three-dimensional urban structures, comes from that understanding of organic life on Earth.
And to jump on that, it's something else that comes to my mind is the fact that a lot of what we do, a lot of how we plan is due to what are the possibilities that we have. If people can afford to buy a car and drive anywhere because it's made pretty much affordable today, that is how the urban form becomes. Back then, if you look at developments, 1600, 1700, and how people used to move because there was no availability to do so, they were constrained to build and develop in a certain way. That is where the step between trying to do with less and you can think about how the arid desert environment influences how you have to build, how you have to survive. It can be a very good lesson to learn how to do with less and to try and not always expand and do more just because you have the possibility to do so. Because a lot of the costs, externalities, negative externalities, environmental costs, things that are not taken into account when we do so, they're not into the equation many times. So the parallel between what we can do with less in a type of environment works very well, I think, to understand how we want to move next and where we want to go. And here, those are the principles of ecology, architecture and ecology, how Soleri wrote them down, and Arcosanti tries to follow all of those in every project, from small scale projects that are implemented, just the construction of a new part of the development, up until the values that I always refer to myself as a Arcosantian. That's why I say we. So we look at those. Urban scale, pedestrian environment, and Arcosanti is an extremely pedestrian environment. And it's one of the best things to do there is actually just get lost into the development. There are homes that become hallways, and then you go down there and you meet a community kitchen, and then from there you can walk out into a space that you didn't see for 2 weeks when you first arrived there. It's the experience. It's an experience. It's not a walk around when you're walking around Arcosanti, and that's what makes a place special. That's what makes what gives curiosity of actually walking around and experiencing the place. It's not walking.
Yeah, walk. Plus, just look at a human body sometime. There's one now. It's organized in a particular proportion, that golden mean proportion, which is essentially 1.6 to 1. It's the proportion of every living thing, by the way. All plants, all animals are organized with that proportion. And it just turns out that it's 1.6 to 1. We're mostly legs. We're in these containers that are designed to walk, if not run. And so to create a pedestrian environment for a whole bunch of reasons is a good idea. But it's also a good idea to just take advantage of this form that we have evolved into. The human form is made to walk. Not just these boots were made for walking. The entire human body is made for it.
And other principles, well, obviously proximity actually is very much linked to pedestrian environment and an urban scale. It would be hard to have the two together otherwise. Ecological envelope, so the thinking of how much of a footprint do you wanna occupy. If you have this amount of land, do you wanna occupy it all, or have something? How do you relate the building environment versus the natural environment? And then less consumption. We mentioned that how much do you want to use of what you can use. Energy apron, so thinking about how we use our energy resources and food resources, which is pretty important too. If you think that we ship and transport most of our food from continent to continent every day. Elegant frugality, creative resourcefulness, and the education point, using the environment as a learning asset. It's something that that's another thing that Soleri took from Wright, and you mentioned earlier about the deficit of natural environment and how that affects our evolution over the years. And learning from the environment and learning from experiences is something that Arcosanti is very dedicated to. And it gives people the possibility of manipulating objects, of learning. It's experiential learning. People that go there learn how to work with nature and with manufactured goods while doing things. So the educational part of it is something that Soleri took from Wright, that took it from the arts and crafts movement in England when he visited Europe, and learning how to do and theorize at the same time. That is the site plan of Arcosanti. You see in the cleaner white lines, those are what we have today, and instead what you see at the top left corner, those more transparent ones, that is the mass of buildings that are planned to be built. It's a planned area development that was last redone in 1980, and that is the area, the topography of Arcosanti, which, as you can see, it evolves pretty much on a linear structure, and that is facing southwards, and that's important because it tries to maximize the use of passive solar energy. So a lot of the site plan itself and the whole development is meant to work according to climate and geography specific of the place.
Arcosanti sits near Cordes Junction. It's about 254 miles. I know because I just drove it yesterday from here. And it's in the middle of what, starting in 1873, had been the Cross L Ranch. So the Cosani Foundation in the late 1960s purchased the Cross L Ranch for not much, and now owns 860 acres, and we lease another 3,200 acres of state land around it. So we have this 4,000 acre land preserve and a mesa in the middle of it, where Arcosanti's plan there, as we were looking at it, is located. 15 acres. 15 acres is the amount of that 4,000 acres on which we plan to build. Just those 15 for a town of about 3,000 people. So it's good density, but it's surrounded by untouched nature. So you can be a city person and a country person at the same time.
That is, there you can see on the smaller picture, you can see the mass rendering of the development, how it will be in the future, and you can discern what you have today, and you can put that in relationship with the actual land that would be left for instead as a natural preserve, and that's not a rendering of future development of Arcosanti.
It's not architecture that is camouflaged. It's not trying to look like rocks or trees or nestle into its site in a way that you don't know it's there. It's there, but that's the only place that it is. It's not just all over the place. So these are some of the buildings that have been built at Arcosanti, prototypes of how to shelter public space, how to build actually in the desert for not much money, and how to make more than one thing happen at a time. And so this big vaulted arch in the upper right-hand corner was the first thing that was built at Arcosanti. Not a hotel, not a casino, not an apartment or a store or a shop, but this big arch to shelter public space and create a shaded spot to do more concrete casting and more work of all kinds, but then it can be cleared off, and so we've had concerts, we have a meeting of all the residents on campus every day just before lunch in that spot. Jackson Brown has appeared there under that very arch. Every summer we have Italian night at Arcosanti. Arcosanti's become a center for the performing arts in central Arizona, and so we have events there, including dinner for 200 under those vaults. And so it's a shelter that's at the very center of the town as it exists so far and as it is planned to be built out as well. It frames views and shelters public space. There's a little article that I gave almost all of you, and if you didn't get one, you can get one here too. From Atlantis magazine, the urban design magazine from the Netherlands. And inside, oh, cool, it's an interview with me. Okay, well, so you don't have to take notes. But the issue in Atlantis for that issue was public space and its importance. And it is at the very center of what Arcosanti is about. Public space defined by the form of private space. So we can't actually see how this works quite in these photos, but I bet we could somewhere. Anyway, there's a sort of a thickness to private space at Arcosanti, and on the one side is culture, on the other side, nature. And so, where I live, an apartment that forms the back wall of a performing arts amphitheater, the arts are at the center of the community there, not off somewhere where only suburbanites get to drive to it, but it's right in the middle of everything. Culture on one side, if I go out my back door, it's untouched nature. And so that's the issue we're trying to conform to. And we've built a series of prototype buildings that are connected, that keep getting bigger and more complex, but are still meant to be bounded by this 15 acres of land in the middle of a 4,000 acre land preserve there.
There's an layout. I use open source software, so I guess they don't translate well. Well, now, again, trying to compare and think about what we can learn from each other. I wanted to point out how, first of all, people that go and visit Arcosanti and decide to spend time there, the demographics are usually very young people that are right out of school or still in school, and also they're from many places. The dominant demographic, or dominant countries that are represented there are Italy, Japan, but from all over Europe and all over the country. In the US, they go there. And I thought that was a very interesting connection that we could do with this area. It just gives me the idea of how the spirit of a pioneer that we know well of here, and people that move into a place. There's a lot of immigration, and this is a very diverse community, one of the most diverse in the country. Many of them are first generation born or directly from a different place. So how do these people interact, and how we learn from each other? And that is, I think, a really important thing for understanding communities. Because one thing, for example, again, that Arcosanti does is that it connects people very well, because it's a very small scale, very intimate context. And while working and living together, you learn a lot from other people that are from the most disparate places on Earth, and how can we maximize that effect that can have on an urban environment, and how much diversity can influence innovation and what you're trying to achieve, and how you move forward. So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about.
It's an important issue. We have Facebook, but it seems to me the reason we have it is because our cities are not designed properly so that we can actually see each other face to face and exchange ideas and goods and services easily. Instead, we're at a distance from each other, separated by the very pattern that we've designed our cities in. And so that separation needs some alleviation. We long, really, as humans, to connect to each other. The best way is in three-dimensional space, physically, intellectually, spiritually, right next to each other, bumping into each other. You know, architects often design buildings like this one, so that the corridors have a little bump in them, so that they say, architects say this, so that people can accidentally bump into each other and exchange some ideas, and they don't have to come to formal events, like this one, and have presentations, but they can just run into each other. Arcosanti is organized that way as an entire town. The town is filled with all sorts of public space. It's a pedestrian town. People see each other. Phoenix, and I'm assuming this could be the case in Las Vegas too, is designed in which there are thousands of single-family houses on quarter-acre lots, or maybe a little less or more, surrounded by concrete block walls. And so you never see anybody on the street. You see cars, but mostly they have tinted windows to keep the sun out, so you're not sure who's in them. And as we get more and more self-driving cars, can't be sure if anybody's in them. And so the issue is, how do we connect in a landscape that has been designed to separate us? Because really that's what the modern urban landscape has been designed to do, separate us into consumer units. And there we are. So Arcosanti is trying to show a model of how to get around that notion.
Speaking of models, again, this is a, where you can see the sites, Arcosanti on the left, obviously. You can see in blue, the little blue parts, that's the blue and gray, the development that is, that has already occured, or that is it already had the planning phase done, and there's the building to be built. That would be the gray area. But that is the land that the Cosanti Foundation manages. And on the right side, you can see a picture of here, the Las Vegas metro area, and the blue is the BLM boundary. And because I'm a little bit of a history nerd, since I moved here, I started reading a lot of books on Las Vegas, Nevada, the things that I was not too familiar with. And I found out how the Constitution, actually the Nevada State Constitution, puts the restriction on land. And in the ordinance that the Constitution was approved with, one of the parts, third part, says that the people inhabiting said territory do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within said territory, and that the same shall be and remain at the sole and entire disposition of the United States. Now, I think this is a very, very important topic, the one about how the land is managed, and Arcosanti has put a limit on itself. When Soleri started the project, decided, the footprint is going to be this on this land that we manage. For us in the Las Vegas Valley area, instead, it's something that started with that when the territory then became state officially, and we have to deal with that whenever. Of course, whenever the development occurs, but also when you're trying to do long-range planning for this area, you need to take into account what that is and how you manage that. So the important question is how do we want to fill that in, and how much do we want to fill that in, and then after that, how do we relate to the boundary itself? How further do we want to go? And that is something that I think we can learn a lot about how Arcosanti tries to manage its own land. And urban fabric and uses. I know this might seem an odd picture again, However, one of the things that I started thinking about after moving away from Arcosanti and coming here is that planners lately like to talk a lot about mix of uses and how that could improve livability, quality of life, and how that can help commute, access, all those things. We all heard that. But we do have examples of how mixed use works, even though it's in a very specific and a little different context in places in Las Vegas. Well, Fremont Street, the Las Vegas Strip, it is very different than the usual mix of uses that you see, but we have some things that other cities do not have, or that they cannot even conceive in their urban area, especially if you think about how many people actually live in those mixed-use contexts every day. You have people that housing, even though it's temporary in certain spaces, and then they actually have a different mix of uses, which is, food, the gaming industry, but that is not what matters. Is what activities you can have and what different uses you can have in the same space. So we can learn how to modify, how to adapt, and bring mixed use in areas that do not have it today. And it's I don't know. Do you hear about there's a book that came out, I think just last year or 2 years ago, The Water Knife? Did anybody hear of that? It's a book that actually talks about arcologies in Las Vegas, and it's interesting reading, fictional history, futuristic book.
It is a fabulous book. I was just thinking about that on my way here this morning too. The Water Knife. It was Amazon's Book of the Month a summer ago, and it is set in 20 years from now. This is good. It's about the water wars between California, Nevada, and Arizona. And how arcologies, the only people actually thriving in the American Southwest 20 years from now, are living in arcologies in Las Vegas that the Chinese have built. And they've been able to build them because the government of Mexico has fallen. China has taken over Mexico, and as a result has all of the drug cartel money to be able to invest in North America, and is building buildings. And there's a lot more to it than that, but it's a very fun read. And while it's a little bit dystopian, a lot of people think it isn't actually tough enough about issues of water and landscape and citizenship that are going to be coming up for all of us.
And speaking of water and energy, I wanted to touch on how environmental stewardship is carried on at Arcosanti and in the valley, with a little bit of details on City of Las Vegas efforts. One thing that Arcosanti does very well is that it mixes high and low tech ways of being sustainable. A lot of it has to do with the design, the way that every structure is designed. There is a very careful process of trying to have the minimal impact on the land itself. That's why, for example, they use concrete that absorbs heat during the day and then releases it at night. That's one of the key components, and that's why Soleri picked concrete as the material of choice for the construction of Arcosanti. And again, we're still talking about how much can you do with less? Because yes, obviously we can design buildings with any material we want, maybe the one that looks the prettiest, or the one that the market is more oriented towards too. But at Arcosanti, there's a very good mix of low-tech ways of being sustainable. And then on top of that, a little bit of the new technologies. So we do install solar panels, and a lot of there are some environments that are completely solar powered.
Architecture is such trouble, and so are architects. Frankly, architecture is a conservative discipline, and we mostly do things the way they've always been done, or the way we heard they were always done in architecture school, and so the next generation does them that way too. That's a real problem, in that there are more humans on the planet than ever, and there are some changes going on in the Earth's climate. There are some economic changes, globalization occurring in a way that pretty much makes all the buildings that are built so far obsolete. Just because we have to pump them full of millions of BTUs of fossil fuel energy just to be able to live in them in the wintertime across most of North America, and then, oh shoot, you have to do the same thing in the summertime too to cool them off. It's as if architects of the previous generation didn't know what planet they were building on. It's a little too hot in the summer, a little too cold in the winter. Ay, ay, ay. So at Arcosanti, stepping outside the mainstream of the built environment, our architecture works harder than yours. That's all. And we have designed it to be passively solar. It shades places in the summertime, gathers light and heat from the low winter sun from the south, and as a result, for lighting, heating, air conditioning, we use about 1/5 of the energy that most places in North America use, just because of the form of our buildings. Oh, actually not just because of that, partly because of that, mostly because of that, but also because our comfort zone is a little broader than most people's too. So it gets too hot, we take off some clothes. Gets too cool, we put some more on. That's easy enough. And we do that with our buildings too. You know, most buildings are designed either as cheaply as possible and don't meet any kind of environmental standards, or really expensively to meet the worst possible cases. But just like humans, you can put more garments on your buildings. You can put sunshades on them. Might take a day to do that, but one day out of 365, shading the building throughout the summertime, and then in the wintertime take those sunshades off and open the building to more sunlight. Here we're sitting in the middle of the day, almost, not quite, it's only 10:15, another 10 minutes here, in a room with no windows and electric lights for some reason, and yet right outside is plenty of sunlight that could be modulated either mechanically or by the form of the building, and we're not doing it.
You know, that's why, since I moved here, a lot of people sometimes come by my cubicle and look at me like I'm crazy because I'm there with no light on, and I have the luck of facing it. I have a pretty broad window, and that's something that I just carried on from Arcosanti, working in the dark or with natural sunlight.
We also use gray water at Arcosanti, and we've just finished a major project. Gray water is a little funny. It's a little expensive, and most plumbing codes require you to have a black water system installed also, just in case the gray water system refuses to work. But for almost all of our shower and kitchen water gets piped through a filtering system into a big tank and then pumped up and used to do landscape watering. So we have some green space at Arcosanti, and it's because we use our water at least twice to make that happen.
And a lot of our green spaces actually edible landscape. There are a lot of olive trees that do pretty well, and we do olive picking festivals every year, or rosemary. I would, just before cooking, I would just walk outside the house where I was living in, and then I would get some rosemary and then bring it back home to cook with it, and that is something that I really enjoy doing. Now, for City of Las Vegas, there are many initiatives that we've been working on, we've worked on lately. Marco, that I see there, worked on the Star Community rating a lot. We just got recognized not long ago as a Star Community. And currently, something that I am working on with Marco is the Thriving Earth Exchange program, which is powered by the American Geophysical Union, and basically connects scientists and people in the academia with local governments to try and build studies, models, or help help for programs and implementation programs about sustainable initiatives. And what we are doing is that we're cooperating with Southern Illinois University for a study that is going to look at how climate change is going to impact City of Las Vegas in particular, but the valley as a whole. And what we're looking at is 4 key areas. We're looking at emergency management response, water supply and water demand, stormwater management, and what we're doing is that we're cooperating with them right now, and we're going to be looking at how what is going to be our vulnerability. So that is the scope of work, and this is currently going on. First results came in. We're going to be presenting in San Francisco at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting, and we hope to publish our complete vulnerability assessment in 2017, around summertime. So that is something that is going to be very interesting to see how we are going to adapt, and how much we're going to have to adapt in the valley.
Well, future scenarios. You know, like Frank Lloyd Wright, Paolo Soleri had a pretty powerful personality. And so what was going on at the Arcosanti Foundation when he was the president and leader of it for most of his adult life, what went on was what he thought would go on when he woke up in the morning, and he had an entire staff to help him make that happen. And so since his death, we've taken a deep breath and developed a strategic plan steering committee among alumni of the place. Lorenzo mentioned that we're an educational center. We have a post-professional master's degree that we offer with Strathclyde University in Glasgow, Scotland. And we also host studios from Columbia University and Penn and Temple and a half a dozen others throughout the year. And from the construction workshops themselves, over 7,000 people have come to Arcosanti to participate in building it since 1970. And then have gone on, as Lorenzo has, to real problem solving in the real world and as planners or business types or software engineers or professors. And so 25 of them have come together in the last couple of years to think about exactly how the Arcosanti Foundation can now build on Paolo Soleri's intellectual legacy generally, and also at the Arcosanti project, how we can become a bigger part of the global conversation of how 8 billion of us are going to live on the planet. And so we've developed a request for qualifications and an RFP system, and have almost, sorry I can't announce it at this moment, picked a strategic planning corporation, a global company that wants to partner with us to develop a strategic plan for Arcosanti and the Arcosanti Foundation generally. And so we're moving into that phase of it early next year. Right now we're in the, here's what happens with planners, right? We're in the midst of a fundraising operation to raise $75,000 for the first phase of the strategic planning process at Arcosanti and Arcosanti.
And since our time is almost up, I want to put the last 2 bullet points together and just leave them in your mind. After all we talked about today, you know, what are the projections for the area, and what, you know, we hear a lot of people talking about growth, what businesses we want to focus on, what we want to build next, and how we want to build it. But what is the relationship between what we want to be in the Las Vegas metro area 20, 30 years from now, and what are the priorities that the area has in terms of climate, geography, needs for services, and how is that going to impact quality of life, and what is the right balance to do that? And we do have many ways of influencing that, and every day when we go to work. So I just want to mention that and say that is a very important and critical thing and it's going to be critical to the work that we're going to be doing in the next 10, 20 years for what's going to be happening in the valley. Because resources are limited, and a paradigm of growth within a world of limited resources is something that is just not possible mathematically, scientifically. So with that,
yeah, thank you for playing along, and thank you for the good work that you do on a daily basis in this place. It's been a privilege to be around you all in your midst for just a little while here this morning.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Joe.
Lorenzo.
Thank you. Are there any questions or doubts?
Whereabouts is Arcosanti located in the Phoenix metropolitan area?
Arcosanti is located halfway between Flagstaff and Phoenix, Arizona, exactly halfway, on Interstate 17, so right in the very middle of the state. It used to be in what is called high desert grassland, north of the Sonoran Desert, but according to the University of Texas climatologists, the Sonoran Desert has moved 50 miles north since 1990, and so we're actually in it now. We were in this interstitial grassland space between the actual desert and the Mogollon Rim and forests up near Flagstaff, but now we're in the desert because it's moving. But we're just off Interstate 17 at Cordes Junction.
Thank you.
Visit us anytime. You know, we're open 7 days a week. We have a great cafe and a dozen overnight guest rooms for people to stay. We've just hosted a tour from the American Planning Association's conference in Phoenix this past year, and had about 50 people staying overnight last weekend for the National Co-Housing Coalition. So come on down.
Yeah, well, I find I've always enjoyed seeing these types of demonstration projects. My feeling is that they're out in the middle of nowhere, and we haven't brought them into any of the cities and tried these things in communities. I grew up in the Midwest, and one of the things I noticed in the West is how we all want to compartmentize our own little lawns and put up a 6-foot fence all the way around the backyard. My neighbors think I'm so strange because I do not have a 6-foot wall around my entire yard. And I tend to be more community oriented, and I would like to see some of these things brought into the cities so we have these environments that we can show other people and test them out. And I think it'd be cool to live in something like that, but I don't want to be 80 or 90 miles away from the city either. So,
Right, well, you'll be fine then in years to come. Las Vegas was a lot further than that from any city when it first started, and here we all are. So we're expecting that to happen to Arcosanti in the next generation as well.
And if I can add to that, the Soleri picked the land also because it was in between Flagstaff and Phoenix. So he envisioned for it to be a pole that could drop from both metro areas and actually serve as another element in between, and then taking advantage of it at the same time.
You're creating urban sprawl?
Are any of the buildings underground?
No. There are at Cosanti, Soleri's first headquarters in Scottsdale, where there are still craft studios and some architecture studios. There are some earth-sheltered buildings. At Arcosanti, it's not underground, it's on rocks. And so they're sticking up into the air.
From now till 20 years after, like you were saying, the place will grow. I'm just thinking about your mental or social aspect of this thing, with you guys living that place when you're kind of isolated in a monastic way. And what about your social life, your entertainment? How do you go around it, and what do you do?
I'm not sure I heard the entire question. Arcosanti has kind of started out in a little bit of a monastic way, and just like towns and cities everywhere, there are different waves of settlers who come through. And so the first people who were building things at Arcosanti were there because they liked construction and the notion of camping out, and so it was a camping place. Later on, we got electricity and real water and energy sources, and now we have clean sheets and a cafe and all of that stuff. And so it's a different group of people who are there now, and as it continues to grow, it continues to change as more and more people with different ideas and attitudes, and yet wanting to be part of some of the most beautiful architecture that they can be a part of, and of this natural landscape, show up and contribute.
And if we're gonna add to that, we also get very creative. We get very creative with what we have. It's a great place where to learn new things. I started doing welding, I started doing woodworking. Everything is there. There are a lot of people that are very competent in many different key areas, especially design and build. So we just experiment. We experiment. It's a very young population. Again, it's a very good mix of young people that come there and spend time there for a while, and instead people that are in the management team and other people that have a lot of experience in different fields, from gardening to welding to woodwork, as I was saying. There's a lot to learn, and you also have a very different relationship with the people that live there than what you would have in a typical setting. So the way you start relating to each other, to me, it's like a family. You have a lot. It's a lot more intimate as a relationship with other people, and you do things with people just like people used to do it not long ago. Get creative with what you have, and experiential learning, and doing things, and spending time together, almost seeing each other every day. So we do a lot of things. There's a lot of things to do at Arcosanti. A lot of them have to do with nature. A lot of them have to do with arts and crafts. The community actually has a whole fund that can be spent for people to purchase different goods that vary from painting, or we just bought a 3D printer, and we just bought a laser cutter to do different things. So it's a lot of crafting and doing and do it together. That is one thing. And then the second thing is that it's a very rich culturally rich environment, and the year is almost broken down, and the time is broken down by different festivals or activities that are going to be there, from classical music concerts like the one that, or the concert that is going to be in October, the Kali concert, or other festivals. I wanted to show a clip from, I'll try to find a promo of a festival called Form that started about 2 years ago, and it's now the biggest event that we have, and it's a 3-day festival that kind of reminds me of Life is Beautiful, the way it's set. It's not just music, there's a lot of, there are speakers, there are activities to do. It's the new type of festival that is being very fashionable lately. So there is a lot to do in terms of learning and trying and experimenting. And this is a clip. It's our amphitheater. So that is just a clip of type of events that we have, and usually the community gets to participate actively to it, the preparation of it. It usually has access to all the cultural experiences that happen there. So that's something that is very good.
It's actually a place for retreat, right? To self-respect your life after, and while you're working in the city, you can go out there as a retreat place to go over what's going on with your life. You can do that too,
A lot of people do that, yes.
Okay, it's 20 minutes till 11. You have to go to the next thing. But we'll stick around if you have some questions or comments.
Thank you for
Yes,
being
thank
with
you.
us.